So left brain typically is more linear, more logical, more text-based, and the right brain is more creative or spontaneous or more abstract than linear.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Wonderful to have you along. I'm very glad to have all the clinicians here in the studio. Brian, Kaleb, Kathy, Ted, they're all present. Good morning.
Yeah.
You know, two halves make a whole, and that's true for everything. But it's uniquely true, and especially true for our brains. We have the left brain, we have the right brain, and I think that's somewhat common knowledge. We kind of use that terminology. But we are truly fearfully and wonderfully made. In fact, you might say if we don't have one of those halves, we're far less than halfway whole. That's how important each part of the brain is to our psyche and to our function. Well, let me tell you what the goal is. We want to capture God's beauty and design and intention for the beautiful brain, okay? We also want to inspire the listener to be thoughtful, to employ both the left and the right-hand brain in our relationships, in our parenting, in our marriages, in our neighborhoods, just the posture that we have with the world.
Yeah.
So, Matt, as you said, the brain as an organ is made up of two halves, and those two halves are connected by a group of fibers called the corpus callosum. And so what we have in that is this beautiful structure, and it is one of the most amazing things in the whole world. It is just being understood. What we know about it, probably while we think we know a lot, we continue to learn more and more and more, and I don't think we're going to exhaust it anytime soon.
Well, if I can just pause you right there, if we think about our knowledge of the other organs.
Yeah.
The heart, and I'm the least one to talk about any of the organs.
Yeah.
But something tells me when we have a pretty good grasp of the heart, what each part does and what's required, and put that next to the brain, there's a mystery within the brain yet that's hardly touched.
Mm-hmm. And I think always will be. I mean, it's just so complex, and there's so much that can be learned. And while we continue to think, oh, we've got so much, and then, it's like the next arena opens up, and it's like, wow. And it is. Yeah. It's one of those places that just seems to just continue to breed this worship and like, wow, there is a creator behind this, and it's really exciting and amazing.
I think sometimes you can notice it the most, unfortunately, when people have had like a stroke or some kind of damage. You can really see the deficits there, and then you realize all the things that part of the brain was doing without us even thinking about it.
When you think about what it is, like as an organ, it is structural, so it has structure. It is chemical. It has chemicals going on. It is electrical. So there's electrical signaling going on. It has blood vessels, and it needs oxygen and all those things. So it is cardiovascular, okay? And then all that stuff working together and all these different things in an amazing way. And then it produces consciousness, okay? Which is something higher than any of the parts, okay? And then somehow, and we don't understand these things, how our body and our mind and our undying soul, how all these things, somehow this connects together. But it's very interesting that we would most connect who we are to our brain, okay? You don't really connect who you are to your spleen. Well, Kaleb might.
I value my spleen.
He values his spleen pretty highly. But the concept is who we are, we really tie to this organ. And it's pretty amazing.
It's so mysterious. Let's go right into it then. Left and right-hand brain. Let's just broadly brush these. Left and right-hand brain. Yeah. Kaleb, do you want to take
Sure. So left brain typically is more linear, more logical, more text-based, and the right brain is more what we'd think of more creative or spontaneous or more in the arts, like for example, and so more abstract than linear. We use both sides of our brain, but at the same time, I think we can have a tendency towards one or the other, right?
Do you tend right?
I would say, yes, I tend right. Okay. Yep. But I think it influences, part of this, right, is it influences the environment in which we like, even here, what we take in.
Yeah.
I remember two men who had difficulty and were in conflict, and I just remember them talking about how they would leave a meeting. They worked together, and one of them would say, this is what they said. Like the specifics, the detail, the logic, the linear.
Left brain.
And the right brain would come away and say, this is what they meant, right? This is what they, intended, and the meaning that was made out of what was said, and how conflictual that was, but how beautiful it was once they were able to understand where they were coming from.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Is right brain more relational?
I don't know that I'd say more relational. I think the emphasis is focused on even we're this is kind of we're I don't know.
Would you say it has more capacity for emotion?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, one of the parts that just makes it a little bit hesitant for us, I think, is if we're talking about personality versus like to classify it as a specific brain side makes it a little bit tricky as well. But there's certainly some of us that are going to be much more emotional, and we would, tend to attribute that to the right brain. There's going to be those that tend to be more logic bound. We tend to attribute that to the left brain. And I think that those are helpful concepts, but whether or not that actually bears out on which brain they're operating from, that's a little bit in question. But I think it's a good example of when we don't operate the same way as somebody else, it's really easy to miss each other.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things is that somebody, when we get to the extremes, okay, when you kind of take an example to extremes, it's easiest to see. So when you see somebody who would be so logical and so analytical that they had difficulty connecting with people, okay, then that's where you would kind of go, oh, that's that overfunction there is creating underfunction in another place. And somebody that's might be so artistic and so whatever, but they have no idea how to balance a bank account or keep track of getting to a meeting on time. But those are kind of like as the things get to the extremes, that what starts to happen is that their strength in one sense causes a deficit in another. So that's where it kind of highlights.
And maybe even, too, it's not necessarily that one is more relational than the other. It's also just knowing where you're at. If you have good insight, I mean, you can have, be very logical and linear, but be very relational. It's helpful if you know that, if you have some insight into that and like, oh, okay, it's hard for me to understand their perspective or where they're coming from. And to see that deficit then helps you then have a little bit of doubt on the way that you're interpreting things, and then that helps you be relational.
I think, too, it's good not to have that bias of like, oh, I'm just logical, so I can't connect with the emotion or the creativeness of it. It's good to be able to purposely access both parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the beauty of the brain is it's malleable. Neurons that fire together, wire together, and the whole idea that it's changeable. And so even if I don't orient towards more logical, guess what? That's a skill or something that I can lean into and grow and build.
You're suggesting then we can grow in this space, right? And learn to access and use for good maybe that hemisphere that we don't tend towards.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about it is it doesn't mean that we're going to always just flip from one to the other, or we're going to be able to, I'm not I know it's going to be a surprise, but I'm not going to be a Picasso, okay? I'm not going to be a Monet, okay? You're really surprised when you see my handwriting. But
Or his picture.
yeah, my picture.
They are amazing. I'm surprised we don't put more of them up on the front.
My artistic ability stopped in second grade. Yeah. But at the same time, my appreciation, I just heard a podcast on beauty here. And you know what? Since I've heard that podcast, I have been intentionally like going, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Oh, and I have, and so I've been, it's not the familiar path for me, but I've been taking that path.
For those of us who are linear and logical, how do we access what would be perhaps a skill or a practice to access and to allow that right brain to grow and flourish?
Well, I think even just from a spiritual development lens, to just spend time in the Psalms, like that for somebody that is more left brain is going to be an exercise. And like, just tell me what you're saying. You're like, I don't have to work with it. Whereas to be able to just sit and like imagine the pictures that it's painting and, okay, what might that be? And there's not like this is the right conclusion, but it's really, a treasure hunt that you're invited to just enjoy.
Okay, so I'm smiling, Brian, because I just sat down with a book on how to read poetry, right? Because I for that very reason.
You're reading that one, aren't you, Kathy?
It's on my list.
Of Psalms.
Yeah.
Psalms is poetry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it starts out by saying, don't fixate on what it's saying and the meaning.
Like, what in the world? Like, okay.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? But it basically says what you do is you enjoy it. You enjoy the cadence. You enjoy the pattern. You enjoy the imagery. You enjoy the imagination. And guess what happens by that enjoyment? Meaning starts to drop out of it over lingering. Now, to a left brain thinker, that's like, oh my, that was helpful.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what you're saying.
I think another opportunity is couples, when your spouse is particularly, left brain, is to go somewhere and then shut off the GPS and just enjoy the ride and sit with the discomfort of not knowing where you're going.
Wow,
It's one
this is
way.
strange.
It's one
This
way
is
to do
strange.
it.
Wow.
I'm starting to rock.
Wow. Is this to create distress?
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to do here,
Yeah.
Caleb?
Man. Okay, that sounds.
Be a book coming out. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, called "Shut Off the GPS."
But your point is taking away some of those faculties of the left brain. Well, let me just say this with GPS and the rest of us. Do we live in a left brain world? Do we live in a dominant left brain world? We live in a day and age of information, of text, of short, you know what I'm saying? We're post the Enlightenment, right? Where everything has been reduced down to I can think, therefore I am, or whatever that saying was, right? I mean, that's gotta be forming, right?
I think the ability to get information so fast and make sense of it, it speaks into that, like, here's the problem, here's the solution, and it pushes it towards more that logical thinking piece of it, where, like with kids in development, the use of imagination and curiosity actually helps like form that right hemisphere a little bit more. And so when we have such ease of access to information, it stops our ability to have that curiosity or wondering.
Yeah. And when we have such information overload, the brain wants to make things simple. Okay, and that's why you take whatever problem you want to talk about, war in the Middle East or immigration or what's going on in the church, whatever. It's so easy for people to go, this is the problem. It because even though it's a problem that has like different trails and different issues that are coming from different directions, more like Swiss cheese, right? Our brain is trying to deduce because of the complexity. And
well, even to that point, Ted, it seems like I can hold more on the left side in terms of the brokenness of this world than I can on the right side. I mean, I go to overwhelm pretty quickly. If this is an emotional thing, if I'm supposed to emotionally take in the world and all that's going on, I quickly melt down. But somehow there's a logical way to hold that. That's interesting, right? Those capabilities, but also the liabilities.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think too what that maybe speaks to as we think about maybe even stretching the left brain would be to think about compassion and empathy, and those would be areas that would be good to strengthen. But you're exactly right that it can certainly get overwhelmed as we think about the things going on in the world and beyond that.
So I think one of the things that's important about right brain, left brain is to remember that we think about Jesus being on the earth 2,000 years ago. And then you think about when the how much people were literate, okay? And then you go, when did the printing press arrive, and when did the Bible arrive in people's languages? Well, there's a 1,500-year gap. I'm broad brushing there too. There's a 1,500-year gap where most people didn't have access to the Bible, and most people couldn't read. but people somehow, the transmission of faith still happened. Happened in the Old Testament. It happened orally. It happened through stories. It happened through sharing. Worship still occurred. Now, it's really easy for us to just think about it with the Bible. And again, I love the Bible. I teach, but it's very interesting. Whenever I work with somebody, let's say in my elder role or even the counseling role, who has a learning disability, and I find out how much I focus on reading, and read the Bible and memorize and this, and all of a sudden, I'm like sticking them in a spot that is I'm like saying, oh, you have to go through this one channel, and I have to kind of step back and go, wait a minute, let's look at these other channels to think about how you take in information, auditorily, visually, how you think about worship and learning that doesn't have to be through this barrier of just the language. And I think it's
well,
easy
let's go there. Let's go to the Bible. Let's go to the things of faith. Let's go to our churches, right? Left and right brain experience. Are we leaning one way? Are we leaning one way in the way that we present God to people? How has He presented Himself in the Scriptures? If He created the left and the right-hand brain, I would have to believe He's appealed to the left and the right-hand brain. Are we doing that in kind? I don't know. But anyway, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Sometimes I think we've moved towards, okay, give us the 3-point sermon, like that has these bullet points of, answers to these questions, which is really helpful. And where do I find it in the text in Scripture? And we need that, and it's important. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge the mystery and the awe that both God is knowable, in a sense, not just cognitively, but also relationally, right? And both of those are true, and we need to cultivate both ways of approaching Him and knowing Him. And so sometimes we do need to know, okay, this reference in this Scripture and this teaches this truth about God that we know, and then we also need to understand what is it like to embrace Him relationally and know Him and experiencing Him in life when I'm walking through this situation. That's not a simple yes-no answer.
I really like that, Kaleb. And the thought that comes to me, the challenge that comes to me is, Matt, when I read the 10 Commandments, can I experience a left brain experience as well as a right brain experience that supports it? And there is one. The left brain, what are they? They're pretty clear, black and white, and I need that. But to supply it also to see God's narrative behind it, to say, there's more to that story. You know what I mean? I think that's a huge challenge.
And don't you think the Bible does that well? Like, just even if we look at the way Jesus taught when He was here through parable, it kind of allowed some visual pieces for the people that were more visual, along with the content of the important pieces of what He was trying to teach.
That there was an emotional connection of the shepherd going out and finding the lost lamb, for example. It resonates in emotion. So I think you're absolutely right, Kathy.
Yeah. It's amazing, too, as we think about God, that, in His creation. And I think to see the creation, to see both of those pieces, because it does inspire awe to think about the exactness of the world, the order, and the beauty that is in the order. And then you see, for some reason, He made seasons and colors and all these different things, and you see the creativity and the diversity, and you go, so which is God? Is He in the order and the intricacy, or is He in the beauty and the fluidity. The fluidity and stuff like that? And you go, wow,
Let's draw this episode, part 1 of the left and the right-hand brain, to a close, meditating on that thought, that God is wonderfully logical and rational, as well as beautifully creative, employing both the left and the right-hand brain as He engages us. This, I think, gives us a vision for living in a healthy way in this new year. Thank you, each one, for being on. And when we come back, we're going to pick the conversation up and have an eye towards our relationships. How do we engage others using our left and the right hand brain? Hope you can listen in.